Have you ever felt the quiet sting of giving your trust freely, only to sense slowly, unmistakably, that something is off? Not a dramatic betrayal, not a loud argument, but a subtle unease that settles in your chest when kindness isn't returned with the same weight. We live in a world where smiles are easy, promises are cheap, and sincerity is often performed rather than practiced. This is not a reason to harden your heart. It is a reason to sharpen your awareness. Stoic wisdom begins with seeing reality clearly, without illusion and without resentment. When we mistake politeness for loyalty or attention for care, we place our peace in hands that were never meant to hold it. The Stoics warned us about this long before social media and modern relationships complicated the landscape. They understood a simple truth. You cannot control the intentions of others, but you can control where you place your trust, your time, and your emotional energy. The purpose of this journey is not to make you suspicious of everyone. It is to make you honest with yourself. Insincerity does not always arrive as cruelty. More often it wears the disguise of convenience. People may show up when it benefits them, speak warmly when it costs nothing, and vanish when your needs interrupt their comfort. This pattern is not rare, and recognizing it is not pessimism. It is maturity. A steadfast mind does not cling to appearances. It observes behavior over time and accepts what it sees without denial. Many people suffer not because others are deceptive, but because they refuse to accept what repeated actions are clearly showing them. Stoicism teaches that pain intensifies when expectation outpaces reality. When you expect depth from shallow connections, you will always feel disappointed. When you expect reciprocity from those who only take, you will always feel drained. The solution is not to withdraw from relationships altogether, but to align your expectations with truth. Insincerity reveals itself through patterns, not moments. One missed call means nothing. A habit of absence speaks volumes. One forgotten detail is human. A consistent lack of attention is a message. The Stoic path asks you to listen to these messages without anger and without self-blame. You are not foolish for wanting genuine connection. You are only vulnerable when you ignore what your own experience is teaching you. Inner peace is preserved by discernment, not isolation. When you understand that some people enter your life for reasons tied to their needs rather than mutual care, you stop negotiating with reality. You stop explaining away red flags because you want the story to end differently. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes shaped by what it repeatedly focuses on. If you focus on excuses for others, you train yourself to tolerate imbalance. If you focus on truth, even when it is uncomfortable, you train yourself to live freely. This first step is about grounding yourself in that truth. It is about accepting that not every relationship is meant to be deep and not every kind gesture is rooted in genuine concern. That realization is not bitter. It is liberating. When you stop demanding sincerity from those who have shown you they cannot give it, you reclaim your emotional autonomy. You no longer chase validation or overextend yourself to be seen. You begin to stand firmly within your own values. Stoicism does not ask you to judge others harshly. It asks you to judge situations accurately. When you see people as they are rather than as you hope they might be, you free yourself from unnecessary disappointment. The goal is not to cut people off impulsively or confront them with accusations. The goal is to adjust your inner posture, to give less where less is returned, to invest deeply where depth is mutual, to remain calm, steady, and self-respecting regardless of how others behave. In the sections that follow, we will examine the clear signs of insincerity, not to fuel distrust, but to strengthen your clarity. Each sign is a mirror offering you a chance to reassess where you give your time, your loyalty, and your emotional labor. Remember this as we continue. Your worth is not measured by how many people stay in your life, but by how well you protect your peace. Wisdom begins the moment you stop forcing connections that quietly erode you. The first clear sign of insincerity reveals itself not in words but in absence. A person who is never there when you truly need them is quietly showing you the limits of their care. At first, this absence is easy to excuse. Everyone gets busy. Everyone has bad days. Stoicism teaches us to be fair and reasonable in our judgments, but wisdom also demands that we observe patterns honestly. When someone consistently disappears the moment your needs arise, when support only flows in one direction, that is not circumstance. That is character. You may recognize this through subtle moments rather than dramatic ones. You are present when they struggle, listening patiently, offering help, rearranging your schedule, lending emotional or practical support without hesitation. Yet when your own burdens grow heavy, the silence answers for them. Messages go unanswered, calls are postponed, promises to check in later dissolve into nothing. Over time, you begin to notice a painful imbalance. Your presence in their life is dependable. Their presence in yours is optional. This realization often hurts, not because you expected perfection, but because you assumed mutual care. The Stoics remind us that suffering is intensified when we attach expectations to people who have not earned them. A sincere person does not vanish when inconvenience appears. They may not solve your problems, but they will stand beside you while you face them. Insincere individuals, however, treat relationships like transactions. They remain engaged when the exchange benefits them and retreat when the cost rises. This does not always come from malice. Sometimes it comes from emotional immaturity or self-centeredness. But the reason does not change the result. You are left unsupported, questioning your worth, wondering whether you asked for too much. Stoic philosophy offers clarity here. Marcus Aurelius taught that we must distinguish between what is within our control and what is not. You cannot control whether someone shows up for you. You can control whether you continue to place them in positions of emotional importance. The mistake many people make is responding to absence with overgiving, hoping loyalty will inspire loyalty in return. This only deepens the imbalance. Insincerity feeds on generosity without boundaries. When someone learns that you will always show up regardless of how little they offer, they have no incentive to change. The Stoic response is not confrontation fueled by resentment, nor silent endurance fueled by hope. It is adjustment. Calm, rational, and dignified adjustment. You stop overextending. You stop prioritizing those who do not prioritize you, not as punishment, but as alignment with reality. A person who values you will feel the weight of your absence. An insincere person will barely notice, except perhaps when they need something again. This realization can be painful, but it is also liberating. You begin to see that your energy is finite and precious. To give it endlessly to those who only take is not kindness. It is self-neglect. Stoicism does not teach emotional coldness. It teaches emotional discipline. It asks you to care without losing yourself, to offer support without surrendering self-respect. When you recognize that someone is never there when you need them, you are not required to cut them off dramatically. You are required to see them clearly. You recalibrate the role they play in your life. You no longer lean on an unstable structure. You no longer confuse familiarity with reliability. Epictetus reminded us that freedom begins when we stop depending on what we cannot rely on. A relationship lacking reciprocity cannot be a source of strength. It becomes a quiet drain on your peace. By stepping back, you reclaim balance. You create space for relationships that are rooted in mutual care rather than convenience. You also strengthen your own inner resilience. You learn that while companionship is valuable, self-reliance is essential. When you no longer chase people who vanish during your hardest moments, you regain emotional sovereignty. You stop explaining your pain to those unwilling to hear it. You stop hoping someone will become what their actions repeatedly prove they are not. This is not bitterness. It is wisdom earned through observation. As we move forward, remember this principle: sincerity reveals itself through consistency, not comfort. Those who are present only when it is easy are not pillars in your life. They are passing figures. A Stoic does not cling to passing figures. He builds his life around what is steady, honest, and enduring. Another unmistakable sign of insincerity appears when every interaction revolves around them. Conversations feel one-sided, not because they are momentarily overwhelmed, but because your presence serves only as an audience. You listen, you acknowledge, you support. Yet when it is your turn to speak, the space quietly closes. Your words are interrupted, redirected, or ignored. Over time, you realize that your thoughts, struggles, and joys are treated as background noise to their ongoing monologue. This is not simple talkativeness. It is a deeper signal that the relationship exists primarily to serve their emotional needs. Insincere people are often skilled at appearing engaged while remaining fundamentally self-absorbed. They may nod, offer brief affirmations, or wait just long enough before steering the conversation back to themselves. When you share something meaningful, they respond superficially, then pivot back to their own experiences. When you express difficulty, they counter with a story that recenters their suffering, subtly competing rather than connecting. The Stoics would see this clearly. A person who lacks interest in others lacks mastery over themselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we are made for cooperation, not domination. True connection requires the humility to listen as much as the desire to speak. Someone who constantly places themselves at the center reveals not strength but insecurity. Their need to be seen outweighs their capacity to see others. You may initially excuse this behavior, telling yourself they are stressed, passionate, or simply unaware. But again, Stoicism teaches us to judge patterns, not isolated moments. If every meeting leaves you feeling unheard, drained, or diminished, the truth is already present. This dynamic subtly reshapes your behavior. You begin to speak less. You choose safer topics. You edit your thoughts before sharing them. Eventually, you stop bringing your full self into the interaction, not because you lack depth, but because depth is not welcomed. This is how insincerity erodes self-expression, not through direct harm, but through quiet neglect. A sincere person creates space. Even when they speak often, they remain curious about you. They ask questions without turning them into mirrors. They remember what you share and return to it later. They do not rush past your emotions to reach their own. Stoicism does not ask you to tolerate imbalance out of politeness. It asks you to preserve your inner order. Epictetus taught that we should not give our attention freely to those who misuse it. Attention is a form of energy. Where you place it shapes your inner life. When you repeatedly give it to someone who only takes you, weaken yourself while strengthening a dynamic that offers nothing in return. The Stoic response is not resentment. It is recalibration. You do not argue for space in conversations where you are not valued. You simply stop offering more than is received. You speak when there is room. You withdraw when there is not. You do not chase understanding from those unwilling to listen. This is not emotional withdrawal from the world, but emotional discernment within it. As you practice this, something important happens. You begin to feel lighter. Conversations no longer leave you exhausted. You become more selective, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for your own inner life. You realize that genuine connection feels balanced. It nourishes rather than drains. It leaves you grounded rather than diminished. Remember this: people reveal their sincerity not by how much they talk about themselves, but by how deeply they are willing to hear you. A Stoic does not beg to be understood. He aligns himself with those who listen naturally without effort or agenda. In doing so, he protects his peace and preserves the dignity of his voice. Another clear sign of insincerity reveals itself when they consistently forget what you share. Not small, trivial details, but moments that mattered to you. The kind of things a sincere person naturally remembers because they listened with intention, not politeness. You may have opened up about a personal goal, a difficult period in your life, a family issue, or something you were genuinely excited about. At the time, they nodded, responded appropriately, maybe even expressed support. Yet weeks later, when the topic resurfaces, their eyes are blank. There is no recognition, no follow-up, no sense that the conversation ever existed. This is not absent-mindedness. It is emotional disengagement. People remember what they value. Memory is not just a mental function, it is a reflection of importance. When someone repeatedly forgets the things that shape your inner world, they are revealing how little space you occupy in theirs. Stoicism teaches us to observe reality without resentment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself not to expect figs in winter. Likewise, we should not expect depth from those who operate on the surface. Insincere people often listen only long enough to respond, not to understand. Their attention is temporary, borrowed, and easily redirected back to themselves. This becomes painfully clear over time. You stop feeling seen. You stop feeling known. You begin to question whether you are asking for too much, when in truth, you are only asking for presence. Consider how different it feels with someone sincere. They remember the name you mentioned in passing. They ask how that situation turned out. They recall what worried you months ago and check in without being prompted. These moments are not grand gestures. They are quiet proofs of care. In Stoic terms, they reflect harmony of action and intention. When words and memory align, sincerity exists. When they do not, something is missing. The danger of staying in relationships where you are not remembered is subtle but real. You begin to shrink your inner life. You share less. You simplify your stories. You tell yourself it is easier not to expect understanding. Over time, this erodes self-worth. Not because the other person is actively cruel, but because neglect communicates a silent message. What matters to you does not matter here. Epictetus warned that we should not attach our sense of value to external validation. Yet this does not mean we must tolerate environments that consistently invalidate us. Stoicism is not endurance for endurance's sake. It is wisdom in choosing where to invest your emotional energy. If someone repeatedly forgets what you share, the Stoic response is clarity, not confrontation. You do not demand remembrance. You simply take note. You adjust your expectations. You stop placing significance in spaces where significance is not returned. This is not punishment. It is alignment with reality. As you do this, you naturally gravitate toward those who remember without effort. With them, conversation feels continuous, not fragmented. You do not have to reintroduce your life each time you meet. There is a shared thread, a sense of continuity that makes connection feel safe and grounding. This is what sincerity feels like, consistency across time. Let this principle guide you. People show you who they are, not only by how they speak to you, but by what they carry forward after the conversation ends. Choose to invest in those who remember, because remembering is one of the purest forms of respect. Another unmistakable sign of insincerity appears when every interaction with them seems to come with a hidden transaction. They always want something from you. It may not be obvious at first. In fact, they often disguise their intentions behind concern, curiosity, or friendliness. They ask about your work, your finances, your connections, your plans, not to understand you, but to measure what use you might be to them. Conversations subtly orbit around what you can provide, not who you are. When you step back and look honestly, you realize the pattern is consistent. Their interest spikes when you are doing well, when you have resources, influence, emotional energy, or stability to offer, and it fades the moment you are tired, struggling, or in need yourself. Stoicism teaches us to observe patterns rather than isolated moments. Anyone can have a bad day, anyone can miss a call, but when a person repeatedly shows up, only when there is something to gain, their behavior stops being coincidence and becomes character. Insincere people view relationships as tools. They may listen attentively when you talk about opportunities, but grow distant when you speak about difficulties. They may praise your strengths while quietly positioning themselves to benefit from them. And when the balance shifts, when you are no longer useful, their presence thins out without explanation. Consider how they behave when you say no. A sincere person may be disappointed, but they remain respectful. An insincere one becomes colder, impatient, or subtly resentful. Their kindness had conditions attached, and the moment those conditions are unmet, The mask slips. This is one of the clearest indicators that the relationship was never rooted in mutual respect, only in extraction. Marcus Aurelius warned against attaching ourselves to outcomes that depend on others. When you expect fairness from someone who operates on self-interest, disappointment is inevitable. The Stoic response is not bitterness, but detachment. You do not argue about their motives. You do not try to prove your worth beyond what you can offer. You simply recognize the dynamic and step back. Distance becomes a form of self-respect. Staying too long in one-sided relationships slowly distorts your sense of value. You begin to equate being needed with being appreciated. You overextend. You give more than you should, hoping that generosity will eventually turn into care. But insincerity does not transform through sacrifice. It only consumes it. Epictetus taught that freedom begins when we stop trying to control how others benefit from us and start controlling what we allow. You are not obligated to remain available to those who only see you as a resource. Protecting your energy is not selfish. It is rational. This does not mean becoming suspicious of everyone or closing yourself off. It means being selective. Genuine relationships do not feel transactional. They do not keep score. They do not disappear when the flow of benefit pauses. In sincere connections, support moves both ways over time, even if not perfectly balanced in every moment. As you adopt this perspective, something shifts. You stop explaining yourself. You stop overgiving. You stop feeling guilty for pulling back. And in that space, clarity emerges. The people who remain are those who value your presence, not just your usefulness. This is the Stoic ideal in practice. Not isolation, but discernment. Not resentment, but alignment. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to live with dignity, intention, and peace. And recognizing this sign brings you one step closer to relationships that strengthen rather than drain you. The final sign that someone is not genuine with you is often the most revealing, because it ties all the others together into a single, unmistakable pattern. They act differently depending on who is watching. With you, they may appear warm, humble, or supportive. With others, especially those they admire, fear, or hope to gain from their personality shifts. Their values bend. Their tone changes. Their loyalty becomes selective. This inconsistency is not complexity. It is calculation. Insincere people do not have a stable inner compass. Instead, they adapt themselves to whatever environment offers the greatest advantage in the moment. One version of them exists for you, another for authority, another for status, another for opportunity. Over time, this creates a quiet unease in your mind, a sense that you never fully know where you stand with them. You may notice how they praise someone powerful while dismissing someone vulnerable, how they echo opinions they clearly did not hold yesterday, or how their kindness fades the moment there is nothing to gain. Stoicism teaches us that character is revealed not by words but by consistency. A person who is sincere does not need to perform. They remain largely the same across situations because their behavior is guided by principles, not profit. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to expect people to act in self-serving ways, not so he could become cynical, but so he could remain steady when it happened. When you recognize this final sign, something important becomes clear. You are not dealing with misunderstandings or poor communication. You are dealing with misalignment. And misalignment cannot be fixed through explanation, patience, or sacrifice. It can only be managed through boundaries. The Stoic path does not demand confrontation in every case. It demands clarity. You do not need to expose them. You do not need to seek validation for what you see. You simply adjust your position. You stop sharing what is precious. You stop expecting what they cannot give. You stop confusing politeness with trust. This is not bitterness. This is wisdom. As Epictetus taught, peace comes from wanting things to happen as they do not as we wish they would. When you accept people as they are rather than who you hoped they might be, you free yourself from disappointment. You also free yourself to choose better. The purpose of recognizing insincerity is not to harden your heart, it is to protect it. It allows you to reserve your time, energy, and vulnerability for relationships that are grounded in respect, reciprocity, and truth. Not everyone deserves full access to you. That is not arrogance. That is discernment. In the end, the strongest defense against insincere people is not suspicion. It is self-respect. When you are grounded in who you are, when your worth is not dependent on approval, attention, or validation, manipulative dynamics lose their power. Insincerity thrives on imbalance. Stoicism restores balance by returning control to where it belongs within you. If you reflect honestly, you may recognize one or more of these signs in someone you know. That recognition is not a failure, it is growth. Awareness is the moment where suffering begins to end. You are not required to carry relationships that cost you your peace. You are allowed to step back, to choose silence over explanation, distance over drama, and calm over chaos. This is not withdrawal from life, it is alignment with it. When you walk forward with clarity, sincerity naturally finds you because you are no longer available to what is false. And that, above all else, is the quiet strength the Stoics lived by.